The book I reviewed for this assignment is by Naomi Klein. It's called This Changes Everything: Capitalism versus the Climate. I chose this book because I have an interest in economics and thought this would be a good way to kind of tie the two together and make it so that it wasn't really awful reading to try and get through, that I could actually enjoy the assignment a little bit. And I did, surprisingly. So what this book pretty much starts to look at is that consumerism is the basis for a lot of our climate problems and our pollution. We place a lot of focus on needing to have a high GDP growth every single year, but the GDP doesn't take into consideration things like pollutants and any negative externalities involved in the process of producing these goods. The GDP focuses on what is produced in that sector or that time period, usually a year. It doesn't count any resold goods or improved goods. It counts just final goods and services, no intermediate goods, anything like that. And we focus on growing our GDP so much that companies don't produce long lasting products. They produce what can be sold now. So it's a cheap good because that's what people can afford because we have a huge income gap. So people can't afford these long lasting products that cost 5 times as much. They can afford the cheap stuff that gets them through right now. And then it breaks and it doesn't work anymore and it needs to be replaced. Well, then all these goods are going to landfills and hopefully a landfill. Otherwise, they're just being dumped or they're being polluted. Things aren't being recycled. They're not biodegradable. They're trash. Uh, we have garbage patches in the ocean that are 3 times the size of the state of Texas. And all they're doing is accumulating things like refrigerators and stoves and stuff that should not be where it is. So, one way that this book proposes that we kind of squash some of our pollution and our effect on the climate is to start producing longer lasting products, forcing companies to, maybe on the back end have penalties or taxes if they do not produce goods that can last X amount of years, or forcing them to produce longer warranties, not a 1 year warranty, but a 10-year warranty, and investing in these goods and making them affordable to people with lower incomes that maybe can't afford that. Um, it, it also takes a look at, it talks a lot about how we need to keep the yearly temperature increase to under 2 degrees Celsius, and that 97% of scientists agree that that's where we need to keep it at, but nobody wants to do what needs to be done to keep it under that 2 degrees. One of the proposals that is said is that we should buy back energy grids. They've done it in Germany. Germany's up to 30% of its energy coming from renewables. And there's cities in Germany, I believe it is Frankfurt, is trying to be completely dependent on renewables by 2025. And I believe maybe Munich is trying to be by 2050. In 2000, Germany was only at 6% of any of its energy coming from renewables. And now, as of this book was written in 2014, so I believe they said as of 2013, Germany was up to 25% of its renewables, or its energy coming from renewables. It says a lot about how we need to invest in things like public transit, and that we would see those jobs come back and it would really boost the environment. Having that access with the high-speed rails would take down the pollution from cars and the roadways and things like that. We'd stop building more roads to be accessible to the growing population. We wouldn't be taking up more land in green space to build roads. We could make it more efficient and on a smaller scale, and make it more energy efficient and provide more jobs, which would boost the economy, which would help that, need for the constant consumerism, because you're putting the money back in, and people would naturally be growing the economy then, instead of having to offer deals and subsidies to companies who are polluting and kind of upheaving the system, and not doing what they should be doing, in my opinion, to reduce their pollutants. And another thing that some in this book suggested is that we need to cool the sun. So they've thought about shooting particles into the atmosphere, almost like a giant fire hose, and shooting it into the atmosphere in order to cool the sun, which, because if they cool the sun, then there's not as much heat. It doesn't warm. It was not a very well-backed idea in the book. Overall, the book has my general opinion of what the book is trying to convey is that we just are greedy, and we are very fickle, and we want the biggest and best, and nothing's going to be done on the back end, even though a lot of companies are pushing for some renewables. As soon as their oil reserves dry up, like Chevron had an oil reserve, and they have to have a reserve ratio. So they have to keep 100% of their working product, whatever's in production, they have to keep 100% reserve on hand, is just a general rule. When they reported that their stocks had dropped down to 95% reserve, their stocks dropped, and people were just not, their confidence failed in the energy companies and the oil companies to provide. And so to combat that, the oil company instead got so many millions of barrels of oil in excess of their reserve. They were at a 228% stock of their ratio. And then their stocks rose accordingly. And so now their shareholders were happy. So that, I think, makes sense as to why there's, in this book, she mentions that they need to buy back the energy grids from these companies, make it more affordable. In Germany, they mentioned that they're run by democratic co-ops. I didn't quite understand the entire process of how that worked, but it seems that it was more employee run. They made the decisions, and they did more what was best in the interest for the people that were using the energy and that were in that area, rather than the stockholders and the shareholders that were profiting off of the people paying their electric bills. So would I recommend this book out to anybody? I absolutely would. I've been discussing it a lot with people. Just I found it as a good way to make sure I understood the content of what I was reading, and to kind of think about it a little bit more. And the best way to make sure you understand something is to be able to teach somebody else about it. So that's what I did. As far as the intended audience of this book, I think it was kind of geared towards people who already thought that climate change was really an important issue to be discussed. She does give credit to some of the naysayers, as in the Heartland Corporation, and how they do have the right idea in thinking that if we're going to blame people, it's going to be a huge change, and it's just not going to work out in the end. People just don't want to. People want change, but they want to not have to be the ones to change. So all in all, it'll be interesting to see if Germany's lead kind of takes hold and into other areas. India also, their people formed a blockade and ended up stopping the permissions for the power plant that was going to be built there because they did not want it. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years, to see if we can follow suit and if we can get everybody on board. It kind of seems that we need to ease people into a change. No one wants the big change because it's scary, and it's just people don't like change. Right, thank you.